Alright, good afternoon guys. My name is Jason Kolodziejczak. Been a member of the club here for, I'm trying to think now, probably about 4 or 5 years. I am a digital compositor in television and film, doing series of work and feature film here in Toronto. What started me on my career path here was the sort of working with the Amiga and doing early 3D animation with the Amiga 500 and then to the 2000, 3000, 4000s. So today my presentation here is just going to be a little bit of a sort of a quick rundown as to the capabilities of the Amiga and what it was sort of capable of so far ahead of its time in comparison to the PCs. We'll walk through a little bit of some of the applications that we used to use. Now, I'll apologize now, it's been a while since I've done this presentation, so I'm a little bit rusty as to sort of flow of things, but this will give you an idea. So again, here, just a little bit about myself. That original 500 that I started with, I got it eventually completely Frankensteined out. I ended up with a progressive peripherals 040 running at 30 megahertz, running 8 megs of RAM. I had a 500 meg hard drive on it. And this was all in the name of, more power. I got to be able to render these pictures that much quicker in order to have those iterations and play with the animation. Initially, I worked with, like I said, the 3D applications. Real 3D was one of my favorites because it had a unique feature set that allowed full-on solid-based modeling. That still, I don't think there's many applications that still do that. Lightwave was another popular one that I worked with, and then a lot of 2D image applications like image effects, Scala, Deluxe Paint, stuff like that. Like I said, now I'm a professional compositor here in Toronto. Been working in the industry for about 21 years. So originally in 1985, the Amiga 1000 was launched for approximately $1,600, including an RGB monitor. And that was sort of the initial launch of the Amiga and the capabilities that it was able to sort of work with. In 1987, the 500 and the 2000s were released, which had a little bit more memory-capable graphics memory on them. They were able to get up to a full meg chip as opposed to just a 512. As well as the inbuilt sort of kickstart, which made things a little bit easier. You didn't have to have that floppy disk to be able to get the machine to boot. Are you guys hearing me okay up there? Okay, just because I'm getting a lot of backwash out that way. So in '92 we saw the release of the AGA chipset on the 1200 and 4000, which again increased that number of colors available as well as a little bit more in terms of the resolution. But in '91, we started to see things starting to turn around in terms of having the external boards or adapters on the Amigas, which offered full 24-bit color. We also had the increased sort of memory space for resolution and things of that nature. So things like the Retina, DCTV, Picasso 3, and Picasso 2 and 4. So again, I know you guys here are all sort of, it's sort of a tailored audience, shall we say. But just a quick breakdown here, just make sure we're all on the same page. So, a pixel is a picture element. So that's basically each individual little element that makes up the individual picture of what you're seeing on the screen. When the Amiga, we're talking about graphics in the Amiga, we talk about the number of bit planes. Bit planes and number of colors are sort of intertwined. It's kind of like a photography thing where you have, f-stop versus exposure. But basically, in one bit plane, you have either on or off. So you can have 2 colors. 2-bit planes, you're going to have 4 colors because you can have the first bit or the second bit on or off. And Windows has decided to throw me an update or QuickTime. Thanks. The Amiga also had a few extra tricks up its sleeve with the graphics chips that it had available to it. The Amiga had extra half bright mode, as well as the ability to do ham, which was hold and modify. So again, it would have it would take the first sort of 5-bit planes and use them for the color information, and then use the last one to denote whether it was half bright or not when dealing with half bright. And then in terms of hold and modify, what it would do is it would use the first 4-bit planes to give you sort of a 16-color palette, and then it would then take the next 2-bit planes to modify the existing value. So if it started with white and it needed a different color, it could then say, okay, the first pixel is white. It would take the next pixel beside that and modify that by a certain amount, and then the third pixel would modify that again with the 6th-bit plane to give you up to 4096 simultaneous colors. The other thing that sort of is odd for a computer that tends to come up, and again, we've pretty much done away with them completely now, which is interlace, which is the ability for the screen to appear at double resolution height-wise. And the reason that comes about is it all sort of falls back onto the NTSC, or North American standard for television broadcast. And again, that all goes all the way back to the 50s, where basically the cathode ray tubes were not able to display a full picture from top to bottom and progressive, much like what we have with our LCDs and stuff now. So in order to sort of work around that, what they did was they started to draw every other line and then go back and fill in the gaps as sort of a way to sort of get that that image on the screen without it completely fading at the top by the time it's drawing the bottom of the frame. These days we have the ability not to have to worry about scan lines, but the interesting thing was that the Amiga, because it was based on the NTSC chipset, or PAL chipset in Europe, was able to actually support interlacing, and that effectively gave you 400 lines of resolution with the desktop that at the time was not necessarily capable of competing machines. So here we have some boring graphs. We'll get into the good stuff in a minute. But so the original capabilities for each of the sort of machines up there, we have the OCS or ECS, again the old chipset or the extended chipset. You know, those are some of the resolutions. So 320 by 200 or 320 by 400 in interlaced by 6-bit planes. So again, up to 64 or ham 4096. So again, at the end there, you can sort of see that we could do 4096 out of 4096 colors. We are also able doing 640 by 400 at 4-bit planes. AGA, on the other hand, would sort of take that up to 1280 by 400 by 8-bit planes. So that offered a number of capabilities. So again, you could get the 256 colors similar to VGA, but that was from a complete palette of 16.8 million colors. At the time, most of the things that were sort of in and around that era, we're talking, you know, CGA was sort of on the way out, but I think at the time, most PCs were still running EGA, which was 16 colors. And as you can see, the resolution there, 640 by 200 was sort of the top end at the one side, and then it could do 640 by 350 possibly as well, if you had enough memory for it. But again, that was only 16 colors from a 6-bit palette of only 64 possible colors total, whereas the Amiga had 4096. And then in VGA, again, released approximately the same time as the Amiga, but it was very expensive and not many people had it. But again, 256 colors from only a 262,000 color palette. So again, still not nearly as much as the AGA chipset when it came on the scene a little bit later. So here's the visual comparisons, and again, they're a little bit small on screen here, but you can sort of see a little bit there in the middle with the CGA. The palettes were very locked down. You were only able to sort of get 4 colors in any given era. Now again, these are all simulations. I've not been able to find working hardware of this stuff anytime recently, so I've done my best to sort of simulate that. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to run over to another application. Okay, so this is what we're going to start with. This is the image that I started with for all of these sort of comparisons. So again, this is a 1920 by 1200 HD resolution image, full 24-bit, so 8 bits per color channel. This is what we're used to these days. This is what you would get with CGA. Does anybody remember what CGA used to look like? You know, remember that I remember playing Test Drive on screens that looked like this, right? You had a Ferrari and it's like, yeah, my Ferrari is pink and white and black, yeah. It also had an alternate palette, which looked like that. In this case, it gives us a slightly better representation of the original image, but again, not exactly the best representation of a hot air balloon. Here we have it in, I think this should be CGA. Nope, that's actually, there we go. OCS. So this is the Amiga version, set to 16 color. And again, you can see that we have a much better representation of what that image looks like because we're able to pull those 16 colors from the entire palette of 4096. Here we have it again, this time at 320 by 200 in extra half bright. So again, we've taken this up to now 64 colors with the extra half bright capabilities. And again, we're getting that color resolution that much closer to what the original was. And here we have, this is in ham. So again, 320 by 200 in ham. So again, all 4096 colors. Now, if you take a look off to the sort of left-hand edge of the screen, you can see there's a little bit of the famous Amiga fringe. And again, this is just a side effect of working with that extra half bright. Now, if you're sort of working with ham and we're familiar with sort of the process that was going on, you could actually go in and optimize the paint a little bit better. You could take this into an application like Deluxe Paint or Brilliance and actually paint one of the 16 colors that was the original palette along that side edge. The reason you get the fringe is because it's not actually created one of those 16 colors on the edge, and so it's starting with a modified value initially and is trying to make those changes as it scans the line across. So again, here we have it at 320 by 400, 6-bit in ham. And again, this is the one that I've gone through now. I've actually painted that left-hand edge. You can see it's cleaned up, the fringe is gone. And again, looks pretty good. So again, just another example of the fringe there. And this is the slightly higher resolution EGA 640 by 200, 16 colors. And again, the palette there is a much better representation than what CGA is, but the EGA is still not quite as nice as what the Amiga was capable of. Here we have it in the OCS 640 by 400 by 16 colors. And again, because we're able to pull that palette from the full 4096, if I just toggle back, you can see the difference just in terms of the color fidelity between the two images. this is an example of what it looks like without the dithering. Now, when I say dithering, what that is that's a sort of an algorithm that the computer can use to sort of place pixels of similar colors next to one another to trick your eye into thinking that there's more colors there. So again, if we just take a look at both the OCS version here, you can see that again we're getting much closer to the original colors just with the base colors there with the green and stuff. If we go back, you can see that the green is actually pretty much non-existent in the EGA version. And here we have in the AGA version, so again 256 colors without any true dithering really happening there. And here we have VGA at 320 by 200. And this is AGA in ham 8. So this is potentially the closest that you're going to get on the Amiga. So if you had a 1200 or a 4000, this is going to be the closest to 24-bit that you can get on that hardware. So again, it's not a full 8 bits per color channel, but it is relatively close. And here we are back to the original image. So for the next part of my demonstration here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a couple of the sort of Amiga applications, just quickly run through some of them. Just to give you an idea sort of what they're sort of used for, and you know, sort of how you can kind of go about working in them. Do we have anybody here that has Amigas at home, or that? Okay, so we got a couple. If you guys are all at all curious about any of this, you can also look at running something like WinUAE, which is what I'm doing here. Again, it's just far easier than trying to drag out the old hardware and having to worry about something getting fried in the last minute and not being able to run a show. But you know, it's an interesting sort of look at sort of being able to play with some of these older pieces of software. What I find interesting now is myself coming from having done this for so long now, there are still certain applications that I have fond memories of and going back to, because it's like, yeah, they had a really cool way of doing this one thing that nobody really does it that way anymore. And so it's kind of like, yeah, I wish I could really go back to this piece of software for that one feature. Okay, so I'm just going to quit out of here and open up my emulator. There we go. Alright, so again, what I'm emulating here right now is just more or less a stock A4000 OS 3.1. And I have several apps that I've installed, just sort of run through here to give you guys an idea. So on the sort of the 2D side of things, there's a couple different paint applications that we used to use semi-regularly. I think probably the one most people are familiar with was Deluxe Paint 4. That was sort of the big one. They did do an update to Deluxe Paint 5, but what I found was with the update and some of the added features that they added to Deluxe Paint 5, it actually got considerably slower than Deluxe Paint 4. So unless I actually needed some of the specific features that were in 5, I would tend to work with Deluxe Paint 4 more often. So I'm just going to call that open here. Nice crack screen because everything's downloaded off the internet these days. So again, we're just going to start with a NTSC low res 320-200, and because of what I'm used to, I'm going to go and take it down to 16 colors. And this would be more often than not what you would be presented if you were running Deluxe Paint on something as early as an A1000 or A500, all the way through up to like I say, some of the 4000 and 1200 that have the AGA chipset. So again, I've got myself a little stylus here, but it's not working 100%. It's decided it's wanting to run only in mouse mode today. But it just allows you to sort of quickly go in and make your drawings to work with what it is you're trying to work. Again, more often than not, Deluxe Paint was used primarily for doing your sprites and things like that. It allowed you to do cycles of animation and things. The other thing that was quite handy about it was that it allowed you to do, they call it like palette cycling. Is everybody familiar with palette cycling? Where basically it would take the palette down here and it would cycle it in such a way that it would give the illusion of animation of a water effect or lights on a billboard or something like that without actually having any animation. It's all stored in a single frame. All it's really doing is just changing the colors in the palette. So this was, sort of Deluxe Paint. This is what most people would sort of work with in terms of beginning to work on graphics, doing different things for game art or things of that nature on the Amiga. So that was the one that was sort of one of the most popular ones. Released a little while later was a program called Brilliance. Now I found Brilliance, or TrueBrilliance, a much better application in terms of capabilities, in terms of what it was that you were looking to do as an artist. Now, Brilliance would be sort of your palette registered modes, whereas TrueBrilliance would actually work in a virtual 24-bit buffer and then just render what it had in that 24-bit buffer onto the screen depending on the capabilities of the machine. So in the case of this Amiga 4000 here, that'll actually give us a pretty good representation of what that looks like. So again, you can see here the tools along the bottom are very similar. We have this sort of the pencil tool. We can draw and do whatever it is that we're looking to draw. Where it comes in handy is being able to choose dithering modes and show what our color palette looks like, and apply those to our fills. Sorry, where am I? So here's our palette, and again you can see here in this window that's giving us a pretty good representation of how much color and how much red we sort of want to add to that palette. And work with. So we can quickly go in and fill things in. And then the interesting thing was that we could use our brush modes here. Allowed us to do things like transparency colors. So in the case of red, I can now sort of draw a red line over the other objects. You can see that it's filling those transparencies in and building up that layers. So as an artist, that's the sort of effect that you want to be able to try to work with to simulate something like a watercolor or things of that nature. And again, I wasn't primarily a 2D artist. I tended to focus more on the 3D side of things, like Lightwave and Real 3D. But where I would use these programs is in creating something called a texture map, where I would take something like a picture of a Coke can and I would map that onto the geometry in order to make it look like a real Coke can in the scene. So, I'm just going to get out of this one and go into another one that we have that I know several of my friends used quite a bit. Disney Animation Studio. I'm sure most of you guys, if you have Amigas, are familiar with Eric Schwartz and his animations. This is one of the applications that he would use. And one of the neat features with working with the Disney Animation Studio is in this sort of thing, again, you can see we're very similar layout to Deluxe Paint, same sort of tool set. But what it allowed you to do is to work with onion skinning. Now again, this was one of those features that they did eventually add to Deluxe Paint 5, but it was quite a bit slower than Disney Animation Studio. But if, for instance, I wanted to draw... Yeah, my tablet here is not working the way I would like it to be working, unfortunately. Making my drawings look very rough. Wow, that's real rough. But if we're making a drawing like this and I go to my next page, you can see now it's sort of dimmed that original image a little bit. That would allow me to go in and trace and see where my animation was from frame to frame. So I'm just going to clear all of this just because that looks absolutely horrible. I wish my tablet was working properly. But if I just do something like a simple ball, I might illustrate it a little bit better. So as I progress through my frame range here, you can see it'll start to change the opacity of all of the frames before it, so that eventually when I get to my next little section here, so if I go with something like that, I can now play this little animation back, and you can see I've got an animation working. And the onion skinning lets me sort of see how fast I need to make things move from sort of one section to another. Oops. So again, the Animation Studio allowed you to do that sort of thing. And then the other thing is you can take it over to Ink and Paint, which would allow you to add the colors to your animations, and then save them out to be able to play back at a later time. Again, one of those things we sort of take for granted now is being able to sort of just, download a movie or be able to, take a DVD and put it on our computer with no second thought to it. Back in the day, being able to run all of these animations and things off of a floppy disk, 880K, was being able to compress it and be able to work with it was quite a feature. So the other thing that I'm going to look at here is a program called Image Effects. This is more akin to what I do now. I am what you would call a compositor. And what I do is I take the animations from the 3D animator guys, or quite often I do a lot of the green screen removals, or cleanup of an image, or adding explosions to a shot that were never really there in the first place. And this piece of software, Image Effects, allows us to do a lot of that sort of thing, again, way ahead of its time on the Amiga, but at the same time kind of limited in terms of what we're used to these days. But if it's... Okay, what's going on here? Alright, it's decided not to work for me. Interesting. Okay, I'm sorry, I'd like to be able to show you a little bit more, but what this program will do is it'll let you load things in. Unfortunately, I could try drawing something in here, but it's not going to necessarily work. Doesn't even seem to be creating a buffer. It's still setting 0, 0. But it allows you to apply different effects and things. The interesting thing about the image effects was that it had some built-in scripting capabilities. So it allowed you to sort of record a series of actions on a single frame and then repeat them repeatedly over a series of frames. And then it also sort of came bundled with the Cinemorph, which was, at the time, an interesting application for being able to do, you guys remember early 90s, late 80s or whatever, all of the Michael Jackson movies or videos where people would morph from man to woman or whatever else. That was all that sort of software. So Cinemorph was the software that worked on the Amiga to be able to do that. So this image effect sort of came with that. I'm going to quickly jump into Lightwave here. And run you through this a little bit. So this looks very intimidating. I don't know how many people have actually worked with 3D software. But the way that it sort of works internally is that it's creating a virtual model of exactly what it is that you're trying to create. And in order to sort of represent a 3D object in a two-dimensional plane of your screen, it sort of gives you a top, a front, and a side view. So this is the modeler section of Lightwave. So I'm just going to quickly see if I can make some points here from my front face. So if I just kind of draw some points as we go through. We'll bring this into a section a little bit later, and you'll be able to see what it is that we're creating. So I've made several sort of points in here. Once I've sort of done that, I can tell it to sorry, I'm just looking for the right one. It's been a while since I've used Lightwave on a regular basis. Curve, there we go, that's what I'm looking for. So I just want to make a curve. There we go. So that's created the curve for me. I can go back here to modify and adjust some of my points to get what it is that I'm looking for. A little bit more of the shape that I'm looking for. I might have it as not helping me here. Okay. So this is what this is sort of working towards, is I'm going to actually use this shape here to turn into a mushroom. So once I've sort of created these basic points in this curve here, I'm going to use the multiply function and go with a lathe node. If I select this point here, you can see it creates an axis down the center of what will be my mushroom. And I will just click the make button here. Okay, so for some reason that's not working the way I expected it to. Probably because I had a single point selected. But anyway, that gives you an idea. Sort of the way of working with that. And then once you're done sort of creating your models, you would save them out to disk, and you would bring them into Lightwave proper, which gives you sort of an overall view of your camera and things of that nature. Now, if there are any sci-fi buffs out there, most of you guys, Babylon 5, sort of the quintessential call to stardom that Lightwave sort of created with this. So again, if we just go to scene here, I'm just going to load one of the 3D space fighter scene, just so you can kind of get an idea of what it looks like. So again, this is what this is doing. This is calling in all of the objects and textures that it needs in order to create an animation. And you can see even on a virtual 060, these things tend to take quite a bit of time in order to sort of create the end result that you're actually looking for. So I think if I just wait long enough, it should draw. There we go. So there we can see we have our space fighters, and if I scrub through the, I don't see, is it up on screen? No, I don't see it there either. I should see a playhead down here at the bottom, but I'm not seeing it at the moment. But if we go through, so we click preview, I'm going to say yes to 200 frames, click OK. And this is sort of where we get to, this is why we need a faster, better processor and faster, better computer. Because it's kind of like watching paint dry. You have to literally watch it draw frame by frame, bit by bit, as it goes through. And again, this is just wireframe. Now again, in today's day and age, my phone can probably outperform Lightwave on, an Amiga 4000. But it gave you an idea as to sort of being able to play back your animation and get an idea as to how smooth the objects were moving, what the camera was doing, things of that nature. So I'll just escape out of that. It's going to let me. Yeah. So here, if we actually look through the camera view, just a bounding box, so this time it speeds it up a little bit. So this is what the camera would see. And you can see here we're seeing sort of one spaceship kind of come in, do a little bit of a loop as another spaceship comes in behind it, and then eventually the camera swings past and shows the planet off in the distance. Now, when it comes time to actually doing this, the computer will go in and calculate where the lights are, where the surfaces of each of the spaceships are. It'll look up each of the textures that is applied to those spaceships to figure out what color the color needs to be that's rendered, and going from there. So here we can see, this is what it would look like playing back semi-real time on the Amiga. And this was all we had to sort of work with until we actually clicked the render button and went to go to sleep and came back in the next day and see what we got. The interesting thing is that even today, with the computers at the speed that they're at and the things that we do, quite often we still do the same thing. We'll set something up, we'll send it off to the farm to render, it'll render overnight, and we'll look at it the next day because it takes so long for some of these things to turn around. I'm just going to see here if I can quickly give you guys a quick render. So we'll just scrub through here to find a frame that's kind of interesting with the planet in the end here. So this is going to set our resolution, and that's all set, I think.
All the way to bottom left.
Bottom, sorry? There we are, thank you. So let's do one, what frame are we on here? Okay, so just to give you an idea of how long it takes for some of these things to happen. It's literally waiting for paint to dry. As it's loading each of the texture maps, you can see there at the bottom it's giving you a status as it goes through. So again, as we sort of wait for this, do you guys have any questions?
Sure. When it's sent to a render farm, is it done piecemeal or like say like one shard does 0 to 20 and the other one?
It depends on the software. It depends on sort of the capabilities of the software. More software these days can do what's called bucket rendering or something of that nature, where it'll literally just render a portion of the frame on each of the computers. Or again, these days with things that are multi-CPU or whatever, each CPU will render a bucket of a frame, and then each machine will render a single frame out of the sequence. So if you have 200 frames, it'll go through, this machine will do frame 1, this machine will do frame 2, this machine will do frame 3, and then once they're all done, they'll go back and do frame 4, 5, and 6, 7, 8, 9, and just sort of continue through until it gets done. And again, it's been interesting as a career watching these machines sort of get better and better at doing this sort of stuff. The early days of Lightwave and the Amiga and things of that nature, we had go through a toaster, and you would have a $40,000, $50,000 Beta SP deck sitting next to your computer, and it would render out. So as you can see how long this is taking, it would render out a single frame. Once that frame was completely rendered, it would take the tape via serial controls, rewind it 2 seconds, run it up to speed to 2 seconds, and then drop a frame in, and it would stop. And then it would go through this process of rendering a whole frame again, rewind 2 seconds, go forward 2 seconds, and drop a frame in. And it was just, and if something screwed up, we were just like, oh my god, now I gotta go back and I gotta, erase the tape, I gotta start rendering all over again. If you were lucky, you could wind back to a certain point and say, okay, I'm good up until this frame, now I gotta render from this frame forward on again. After we sort of got past that, we started to see things like the perception and the PAR and the flyer and things like that, where all of a sudden hard drives and the buses got fast enough that we could actually start recording frames onto a hard drive and then play them back off of something like that in a sort of compressed or serial form. These days we just take it for granted, right? We can play HD or 4K footage on our computers without any trouble, but back in those days, you sort of had to be very economical about what it was that you were actually committing to a tape before you went home at night, and what you came back to in the morning, you'd be just going, oh my god, I forgot to turn on the layer. And you'd be wasting a whole day. So anyway, any other questions? Sure.
That 3D modeling, how has that evolved? Like, Terminator sort of showing the rotating something, extruding. Is this still the same, or do they have nowadays like some virtual reality?
It depends on what it is you're trying to do, but I think for the most part, all of those tools still exist in one form or another. Where you get into advanced things these days is something like Mudbox or ZBrush or something like that, where what it does is it allows you to take a basic model, and doing something organic is very difficult on the computer. Whereas these applications like ZBrush or whatever allow you to sort of take the model and just paint on it. It allows you to paint what's called the displacement map. So it tells the computer how far to move those points in space out or in or things of that nature. And they can be very efficient in the sense that they only render out what they need to for any given frame. You're not having to have massive amounts of geometry in there in order for it to work. The other thing that we're working with at our office now more and more is we actually have a LiDAR scanner. So what we'll do is we'll actually send this out to the set where the people are filming a green screen or doing some sort of an effect on a piece of a film or television show, and we will literally scan the set so that then when we bring that back into the studio, we have an exact replica of what the set was, and it allows us to position everything that we need to position in the shot accurately, so that it makes it much easier when we go to composite it, that it's like, okay, I know exactly where that door handle is, that when I want to have that door blow apart, that's exactly where it is. So that makes things a lot easier these days. Any other questions? No? All right. You guys can always find me on the mail list or get a hold of me via Leaf at any point. If you guys are interested in sort of taking a look at some of the software or whatever else, like I say, it's definitely an interesting sort of thing. I guess it's a little more difficult now to try and find some of the how-tos and things on these software packages because they're just so old. There's not much out there. You know, again, this stuff predates the internet, which sounds kind of scary. But there you can see that's how long it took to render a single frame. Now you have to do, if you want to do 1 second of footage, you have to do that 30 times. And if you want 10 seconds of footage, you got to do that 300 times. So you can see very quickly how long that stacks up and how long it takes to actually get an animation out of a computer back in those days to get something like Babylon 5 onto air. So, anything else? All right, thank you very much. Enjoy your time in the show.